if I may. It's a real pleasure to welcome Haroon Moghul, and we'll talk a bit later and have time for questions and answers. Please welcome Haroon Moghul. Thanks so much.
Hello. I'm pretty loud, so I don't know if I need the mic, but you need the mic since you're recording. Cameras follow me everywhere. It's called being Muslim. It was a joke. It's okay, you can laugh. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to read a section of the book, which the cover is orange in honor of our president, because I saw it coming, so I thought it would be a nice gesture. Ironically, actually, I asked the publisher if we could maybe change the subtitle to a North American story in case I flee to Canada, but they were not amenable. So the section I'm going to read is one that's personally terrifying to me, because when you write something, obviously, as a writer, there's things that you find more, I guess, affecting, and then readers find other parts more affecting, and so there's this constant search for where's that happy middle ground. And this book is very, very personal. It took a lot out of me to write, and I come from a very conservative family, religiously speaking, and I talk about a lot of things that I don't think my family would have been particularly excited for me to talk about. And so I had this week-long panic attack over whether or not I should invite my family members to my readings, because it would be rude not to, but then if I read the book out loud, I would no longer be part of the family. So it was like a very exciting balance. So what I'm going to read is actually a section from reasonably early in the book when I was, 17 years old. And it was before I started NYU. I was in high school. And I had come up with a plan to sneak out to prom. So I had a girlfriend secretly. My parents had no idea. And I lived in a farm town. So there was about 95 kids in my entire high school. Everybody in the town, except my parents, knew that I was going to prom. It was amazing. So this is a section where basically it opens with my parents beginning to figure out that I was not the Muslim kid they thought I was. When I finally got to the kitchen, a pit in my stomach, it was to find my parents waiting in ambush. My father fired first. "Why did you have a girl in your car yesterday?" My eyes went wide. My mind went into overdrive. My face compensated by retreating into confusion, perhaps disbelief. A girl? As if I didn't know what one was. Perhaps if I forced them to define the female of the species, mere embarrassment would have prevented them from continuing the interrogation. On reflection, this would have worked perfectly. As it turns out, someone in the local Muslim community had snitched on me. This is what I got for driving around in a liability of a Toyota Land Cruiser, of which there were only 2 in my entire town. One of which belonged to my family, and the other of which belonged to the mosque president, whose family was also the only other Muslim family in town. The 2 Land Cruisers were additionally the same color, beige with brown paneling. Since the mosque president's wife and my mother both headscarved, you can imagine the neighbors' confusion. They look the same to me, so do their cars. I decided to own it part way. She needed, I said, a ride home. And since offering a girl a ride home was already a trespass, maybe that and that alone was the reason for the momentary panic in my eyes. I folded an Eggo waffle in half and shoved most of it into my mouth, washing it down with a glass of chocolate milk. It was nothing, I said, but I'd been sloppy. I would have to pursue my secret life with even greater deception. McDonald's never called back, so I found another job, one that would be easier to hide, softening the blow of being rejected by a chain restaurant that sells food-like product. It might have been unethical and possibly illegal. I helped students write their thesis papers, from scratch or to rewrite. Technically, therefore, I did not graduate high school once, but several times. I profited from my bookishness in order to pay for a life that tried desperately to escape from it. I'd walk past Carla every morning because the science wing was closest to the senior parking lot. My friends teased me for not making out with her. I, too, wondered why I held back, even as I knew. I was scared. But there was an absence of opportunity, too. Her friend Samantha presented one. By announcing a pool party at the end of May, which I knew I had to attend, I'd make my move then and there. But of course, Samantha's house had to be beside the mosque president's, which meant he might see my car, which, as noted, was also his car. A huge risk to take 2 weeks before prom, But this new Haroon loved the edge. Not enough, however, to drive over it. I asked my friend Jacob to be my ride. Jacob was a bright kid who sometime in the course of senior year developed the habit of falling asleep during everything. He was bright enough to coast on his wits for a while, but the warning signs were there. Judging by his snoozing, he deemed most of his life too unimportant to be present for. Also, he almost always wore oversized hand-knit sweaters, meaning he looked like his mother had purposefully gotten him lost inside himself. Also, in case you forgot, Jacob was usually asleep, at least not when driving. Incidentally, Jacob's mom took a liking to me. She wasn't particularly religious, but always asked me to find Jacob a nice Jewish girl, as if, as an adolescent Muslim stranded in mostly Christian Connecticut, I had some special access to Jewish women that she lacked. On the way to the party, naturally, Jacob's nose started bleeding. So badly that we drove right past Sam's house and almost to Massachusetts, in the apparent belief that the closer we got to Canada, the farther we were from harm. No luck. Jacob practically ran his mom's station wagon aground on a stranger's lawn and nearly did a faceplant on the grass as he sprinted towards the biggest tree on the lawn. It took me a moment to realize he was repurposing leaves as napkins. Then we met the homeowner who had real napkins, which she happily shared after we explained why a plurality of our town's Semites were apparently washing their face with oak leaves while laughing and falling over. This unfathomable omen aside, I ended up that night exactly where I'd wanted to be, on Samantha's pool deck, with Carla, her beautiful legs pushing on mine. My need displaced me. Blind children learn how to walk. It's deep instinct buried well inside them, which in the right time and place comes to the surface. Some force reached entirely around my insecure, agitated, cowardly impediment of a self and shoved it to the floor. I had never felt so overcome. But here's the thing. I could sense with some radar I did not know I had that she wanted the same. The energy hung in the air. We were opposite ends of a magnet. Fusion releases more energy than fission. I just reach over, put my arms around her, and watch her mom's station wagon pull up. With equal and immediate force, we jumped away from each other. I walked Carla to her car dejected with this meager consolation. As she made her way to the back seat, she offered me her hand in apology. There was so much in that grasp that I fear I have spent my entire life trying only to return to that squeeze, somewhere I could be held with someone instead of just myself. I'd led my parents to believe that on the Friday night, the first week of June, convenient, I'd sleep over at a friend's house in Agawam. This friend's mom conspired with me, as did everyone else. To leave school early on the day of prom, one had to have parental permission. Most parents gave theirs. Mine, you do not need to ask. So the principal winked at my departing a little earlier than the actual conclusion of the day. I crossed state lines to my friend's home, showered and shaved, and returned to Summers in time for the evening's events. Jacob's neighbors were on vacation, so I parked my Toyota Land Cruiser not merely in their backyard, but under their deck. Having been caught once before, I would not make the same mistake twice. At Jacob's house, I finally relaxed. I was going to get away with this. We went into his backyard and posed for the camera. Back then, you had to wait for pictures to develop. You actually got to live in the moment, instead of watching yourself living in it a few seconds later. The six of us, Jacob, Jeremy, and I, with our dates, were dressed to the nines, and the smiles we wore for the camera belied what was around the corner. For reasons that will become obvious, I have no other pictures of me with Carla. At prom, practically every student went out of his way to congratulate me, amazed I'd made it. More encouraged that I'd wanted to attend in the first place. Everyone's belief system appreciates validation, and I wanted theirs, maybe so that one day I wouldn't need it. Maybe soon. I'd gotten rejection letters, but also admission letters. Between Boston University and NYU, I picked the latter. All good things must come to an end. I'd never see many of my classmates again. I'd never see this me again. It'd be like it never happened. Carla and I slow danced to Sarah McLaughlin's Adia, which I cannot listen to even now without breaking out in goosebumps. I still ask myself who Adia is, why she needs to know we haven't done anything wrong, and why I was receiving an Islamic meme here of all places. And Satan asked Adam, "Shall I lead you to a tree and to a kingdom that never dies?" The apple tastes better than it digests, but Islam has no original sin. Adam is tempted by the desire to live forever. Yes, he fails, and he falls. But only in falling does he become the caliph he was meant to be. So maybe we missed the point of the story all along. You can do the wrong thing for the right reasons. Adam and Eve ate from the tree, but they repented. They were forgiven. They stuck together. I was just a 17-year-old who wanted more than anything in the world to belong, to believe that there was a world he could just be inside and a part of, that he didn't need to analyze from without, prejudge, damn, doom, condemn, excommunicate, or be excommunicated from. If only for a night let the stars circle me. The flared jeans, the metal necklaces, the occasional bracelets, the wallet hooked on a chain to a belt loop. These were the tribal markers of an amateur snowboarder, meant to validate me by announcing that I was other than me, sticking out to fit in. But those emblems couldn't tell you how badly I'd wanted this cheerleader. We can want what others want because they want it and still want it for ourselves. Sometimes we're unable to point to where our desires begin and others end. After prom, we might have stopped at Friendly's, but I can't remember. Carla wanted nothing to do with me. The last thing she did was chide me. You can't drink, she said. You've got to drive. The next afternoon, alone in an empty bedroom in someone else's house, Carla chose AOL Instant Messenger to shock and awe me. We should break up. Sure, I typed, lied, agreed, died. I'd not expected this would end, even as I'd made plans to go away for college. You can hold two contradictory hopes in your head and still be devastated when one of them gives way. It's wanting to have your cake and eat it too. But what the hell else would you do with cake? I drove with my parents to New York the very night after prom to see my family. I sat broken and unspeaking in the back seat. My mom would pass away less than a decade later, done in by cancer. My father is still with us another decade after that. But I could not admit to them, then or ever after, that my end run around them had failed because I was, in the end, them. Carl and I never moved beyond that first kiss. I'd been more Catholic than the Catholic girl. While I trembled even to meet her lips, she told me in casual detail what intimacies she would and would not be okay with. I nodded determinedly, as if this was a subject I had long ago mastered. And yet for me, raised on the idea of marriage once and forever, I believed dating was no different from marrying. Once we were together, we would remain together. Terminology was technicality. So I was ruined like I could not believe. It's one thing not to go to prom, and another to be dumped the day after you've pulled off the greatest deception in your brief life history. If every person has one great test, mine was, and may still be, parting. I'd learned I could deal with death, but I could not accept that God would let lives get entangled only to be yanked apart. How can you live forever and be apart forever? That's death, a real end without resurrection. A place where Islam can't go, doesn't help, stops working. Had Carla not broken up with me, could I have broken it off with her? Khalil Gibran once said that the deeper sorrow carves into you, the more joy you can contain. From which I learned this lesson. The further you let a person into your soul, the longer it takes her to leave. I couldn't have guessed then how much it would hurt to give anyone anything of my heart, but I had stupidly given all of mine, presuming the future existed while the present was still coming together. The following spring, I stopped by Carla's house to pick up Bradley, a good friend of mine, though he lived on the other side of town. Jeremy, who also lived on the other side of town, was standing beside me. None of this memory makes any sense, but that's probably because all I was focused on, and all I can see so many years later, is Carla at the top of the stairs putting dishes away. She might have waved. A year later, we ended up across from each other at a diner in Connecticut and shared where life had taken us. Jeremy laughed as he and I walked back to my car. That, he said, was the longest conversation you ever had with her. Maybe I should ask her out. I never spoke to her or even saw her again. Maybe we do not live one life but many. Some overlap, some are eras apart, some never intersect. Maybe I tell myself this to keep feelings away, because if I know they can unfold somewhere else, I do not need to know what they mean in this universe. My religion says a man should not be alone with a woman, but somebody should have told me a man should not feel so alone that he needs to be alone with a woman to feel like his life is worth living. Her smile, her lightness, her kindness, all of them a bond she provided to a universe I otherwise felt misplaced by. But what I missed most of all in the months after we broke up was her hand. From the first time she offered hers at a roller skating rink to the last when we left the dance floor. It may be, God says, you hate a thing and it is good for you. Beyond my desire for her was an awesome loneliness, a feeling of living in a nothing place only briefly interrupted. Life bereft of love was no life at all. From time to time, this emptiness made the world stark and even beautiful, but most of all it haunted and pursued me. Something always comes from nothing. With every difficulty, he says, there is relief. It could be that this is me or all of us. We stumble onto God in the blanks, the places we live in but don't ever really belong to, if only to be taught this hell of a mercy. We don't belong here. Thank you. That is a chapter from the book. And yes, I got dumped the day after prom. It's amazing. I'm not bitter at all. Slightly, but not really.
Thank you, Haroon. If I may start the Q&A part of the evening, I want to refer to an article that was published a couple of days ago in The Atlantic by Emma Green. The article is titled, Trying to be an Apolitical Muslim in America. Haroon Moghul's book, How to Be a Muslim, tries out a new genre, writing about Islam that's not about terrorism or war. How do you feel about that title? And tell us a little bit what brought you to write a very different kind of book.
So, in the spirit of being political, to answer a question about being apolitical, I'm going to answer a different question because that's what politicians do, like very expertly, right? Unless it's Donald Trump, then he just starts tweeting. But I can't do what he does. So the book is titled How to Be a Muslim, and the first review I got of the book was pretty positive, but at the end the reviewer was like, he never answers the question of how to be a Muslim. And I was like, I think he missed the point. But even better is there's a book that was published in Malaysia called How to Be Muslim, which is like a guidebook. So there's going to be some really confused people out there who are going to be like, why is Haroon's book like a series of pictures of how to pray? And then there's going to be someone in Malaysia who's like thinks they're giving their kids some book on prayer, and they're going to read about a kid sneaking out to go to prom. So there's going to be some really exciting overlap, I hope. When I came to NYU 1998, so wow, this bookstore was not here. When I came to NYU, I had a very tenuous connection to my Muslim identity, and I grew up in a very small, very Christian town, which was a lovely town. It was just very small, and I wanted to come to a big city, so I came to New York. And you kind of have to like whittle New York down to size because it's so huge that it's just overwhelming. So I basically debated between joining the South Asian Club or the Muslim Club. And the South Asian Club, I went to the first event, and it was a dance party, and I cannot dance. So I was like, I'm not going to spend 4 years not dancing, right? Because that's stupid. This is literally why I joined the Islamic Center at NYU. Because I was like, I can't dance, so I might as well go join Muslims. And so this is like terrible life choices come from like very honest admissions of our own failures at certain important things. So, I'm answering your question, I promise. I promise I'm answering your question. So, I got really excited because I met all these different kinds of people who were Muslim, and I thought to myself that, I might not be a particularly religious person, but I can help build a religious community. And, me and a few kids, we were like, we can make ICNYU, which is now a massive institution, into something completely different from any Muslim club that anyone's ever seen before, because it's not going to be about, you have to be a certain type of Muslim to come in, right? We were not challenging anyone's Islam. We were just saying that if you identify as Muslim, you can come in through the door. And in my head, I was like, it's fine, because I'm just going to go to law school after that because I'm South Asian, and if I can't become a doctor, I have to become a lawyer, because if you don't have a BMW, no one marries you, and this is like South Asian eugenics. Like, we literally do not let people, it's actually amazing, we do not let people reproduce until they have certain kinds of vehicles in their garages. It's amazing. Like, no one will marry you unless you can afford a Mercedes or a BMW. If you think about it, we're kind of like fascists. But, like, slightly less intimidating because we're South Asian. And so the accent is just not as scary. I'm still answering your question, I promise. I told myself it's fine. Like, we can do this, and I'll go to law school, and I'll do what my parents want me to do, and who cares if I build a student club and, spend my time? Because I liked it. And, I was elected president of the Islamic Center for my senior year. I celebrated by asking a girl out. I'm so sad. I'm like Bollywood. I wrote her a poem, and I decided to read it to her in a Starbucks. And this is still my greatest NYU memory because it's like the Starbucks down Broadway, like towards Soho. I'm sure you've passed it actually many times. I occasionally pass it and start crying. Not because I'm sad, but because I'm embarrassed. So halfway through, so I used to give Friday sermons. So I'm like a religious leader, and I'm like asking this girl out. Halfway through my reciting this poem to her, her boyfriend walks in and sits down. I didn't know she had a boyfriend, right? I had asked a friend to do research, and this friend completely failed. I think he now runs one of Google's most senior development. I don't know. It's amazing, right? And he's like, "Hey, you give the sermon at the mosque," and I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Asking your girlfriend on a date." So that went over really well. So anyway, I was elected president of the MSA, and my third day as MSA president or Islamic Center president was 9/11. And we were the largest Muslim community in proximity to Ground Zero. And I'm a 21-year-old kid who's incredibly shy, insanely awkward, did not really know how to handle himself in these settings, and it became what I call being a professional Muslim. And so one of the reasons I wrote this book is because this sort of lifestyle of constantly commenting about Islam and Muslims and having to defend your identity and explain who you are, and reducing every single conversation about Muslimness to something to do with violence, right? It's either you're a terrorist or you're not a terrorist, but the key word is terrorist. So I wanted to write something that was that challenged that. I didn't want to write a book that talked about politics or national security, even though that's there in the background, because it affects me, I think, in a lot of different ways. But I didn't want to write that book, because that's the book that everyone wants to read, and it doesn't really tell a story about what I actually think most Muslims go through. So that's my very long answer to your question. Yes. Awesome.
Thank you. I'm going to open up for any questions, and I see hands already, so hold on and I'll bring the microphone.
Have you familiarized yourself with Muslim mystical writers?
So in the book I talk a lot about a few people, I guess depending on how you want to define mysticism, who were very influential for me intellectually. So Imam Ghazali, Rumi, a few South Asian poets like Bedil and Ghalib, and a guy named Allama Iqbal. If you don't know who they are, it's fine. I explain why they're important to me in the book. But I was a philosophy major at NYU, which is a great major to do if you don't want to have a job, because it's you can analyze anything without pay. So it's a great career choice. So I do talk a lot about and towards the end of the book, I have a few encounters with, I guess, what you would call mystical teachers or Sufis, for lack of a better term, who were really influential on me making sense of how my life fell apart. The book is basically the story of how I failed. It's a story of how I failed, right? It's how my life crashed and burned when I was about 32 years old, and how I tried to pick up the pieces and make sense of how did I, as a person who supposedly had so much promise on paper, end up driving my car into a ditch, and then trying to make sense of that. Yeah, don't worry, it's not a painful memory because I wrote about it, so it's fine now. I can laugh about it. I'm doing okay, Yeah, I'm a happy person. I've accepted hair loss. It's fine. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. Do I feel for my mom? So my mom passed away. This is one of these things that we call irony. My mom was, there were 16 women in all of Pakistan who, let me actually go backwards on that. My grandfather and on up were religious scholars. The term in Arabic is qadi, like a qazi. So they were they spoke Arabic and Persian. They were it's like being from a rabbinic family, for lack of a better term. And so my grandfather was very interesting because he was very religiously conservative, but he was not, he would have been completely he would have either laughed or been utterly disgusted by the kinds of things that happen in the name of Islam today, because it would have made no sense to him. So, he wrote poetry, he spoke Persian, he spoke Arabic, he spoke English, he did yoga, right? And he saw none of these things like it was this sort of religious humanism that used to be very common before like the Taliban showed up, basically. So what was interesting is that he had 7 daughters, no sons, and he raised them all to be educated women. So I was actually raised in a really interesting environment where I was spared this incredibly unfortunate but very common association of religiosity and patriarchy. Because in my mom's family, it's all women, and they all like outshine their husbands. Like you don't even know the husbands are in the room half the time because the women are so much more like as personalities are stronger. So my mom was one of only 16 women in the entire country of Pakistan way back in the day who was in medical school. So she became a radiation oncologist. I was actually in Seattle 2 years ago, and I was at a Shabbat dinner service with people who were like probably had net worths in the high tens of millions, and one of them was amazed that my mom was educated, which is like amazing because it kind of makes you wonder what people think of you. If you're like, what did you expect? Like, like I literally just like left a cave, right? So my mom was a radiation oncologist, and she died of cancer. So the irony there is kind of, but I'm very much my mom's child because she loved music, she loved poetry, she loved movies. She was a Star Trek fan. She loved Eddie Vedder because it kind of sounded like Qawwali. So she thought Pearl Jam was sort of like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, so she kind of connected those two things. And she was a very creative person, and she was a teacher in addition to being a doctor, but she was very religiously conservative. So it was an interesting kind of childhood to have as someone who's sort of very religiously conservative, but very creative and outgoing and things like that. So I think in many ways, of course, I miss her, but I also think that it's like in many ways this book is sort of an extension of how she raised me, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. Hey, Haroon.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Question for you. So you talk about a lot of your vulnerabilities and failures, and that's not an easy thing to do. And you mentioned a week-long panic you had. Can you talk about the process you went through to overcome that panic and get you to where you are today?
So about a month ago, my boss, a woman named Rachel at Shalom Hartman, we were talking about earlier, got an advance copy of my book. And then I had a panic attack. It's like, oh my God, people are actually going to read this. Like, it's like fun. You're like, oh, I'm writing this book. And then you realize like, oh my God, people like are going to read this. And Rachel is like a Jewish mom. So she's my boss, but she's a Jewish mom. So she read the book, and now every time she looks at me, she kind of just wants to start crying. Like she can't because she's my boss, right? But like she kind of looks at me like she wants to give me a hug, which is a really weird kind of situation to be in professionally, because she just feels bad for me. Like she wants to like pat me on the head. She's like, and actually Pakistani moms and Jewish moms are like the same ethnic group. It's amazing. I don't know where this comes from, but there's this weird convergence. Someone needs to figure this out. How I got over it, I think, for me, writing the book was actually a way out of it. So trying to put thoughts to paper, I feel like when you say something or you write something, you break its power over you. And when I was struggling with a lot of these things and I started writing it out and writing it down, I was able to make sense of what I was going through and try to find some kind of meaning out of it. So, at my lowest point in my life, when I was severely suicidal and like really depressed, writing the book was actually what kept me going. Because there was this idea that I'm working on something, and I don't know what's going to become of it or if it'll be published or anything like that, but my working on this, and since it's a years-long project, requires me not to kill myself because I have this. And so, I feel like, for people who are depressed or bipolar, what have you, or just in a really bad time in their lives, having something external to yourself that you can pour yourself into is really important. So that can be music, it can be art, it can be, community life, something, but you're building something that requires you to kind of be there for yourself in a certain way. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, you're welcome. Also, it's good to see you.
I want to start by saying I love the way you say Pakistan. A lot of people here with their different accents, it sounds very not like it.
Okay, Pakistan.
So this is a little unrelated to your book, but it's very related to being a Muslim. Keeping aside the thoughts that everyone has in today's time that Muslim equals terrorist or terrorism, I feel like a lot of people have this idea of being Muslim, and that is, you fast during Ramadan, you pray 5 times a day, you do certain things, like, there's a checklist of how to be a Muslim.
Yeah.
And in today's time, it's, there's a fine line between balancing your worldly and your religious responsibilities, and not all of us seem to live up to that checklist or idea of being a Muslim. And I feel like when you go out into society where people who are not Muslim look at you, they feel like, well, but if you're Muslim, why aren't you doing ABC or XYZ? Based on your experience, how do you deal with not feeling like you're not living up to that idea or that, that checklist, but still be okay with it and still feel like you're a Muslim? And that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, first is it's your own identity, right? Like, no one can define your identity for you unless you're at the airport, in which case they can make you whatever they want you to be, and then you don't have a choice. And then secondly, if you carry this book with you on a plane, your identity will be further defined for you. So that's an exciting thing to think about. And it's also a good way to keep the seat next to you open, because I've learned in my experience on Amtrak that if you just open a book in Arabic, it can be anything. It can be like cake recipes, right? You just open a book in Arabic, no one will sit next to you. Like, you're going from New York to D.C. and they're like, that's fine, I'll stand, right? Like, just, like, as if it's the subway. As you can tell, I have ADD. So I will answer your question. What I think personally is that, like, to be human, to be fundamentally human, right, is to neither accept yourself as you are, because if you fully accept yourself as you are, you're Donald Trump. You know what I'm saying? Like if you just accept that I am who I am and nothing in me is in need of improvement, then you become, like, kind of a terrible, wicked person, right? Like, you can't. If you just think, like, I'm the greatest person in the world, or I'm perfectly fine as is, and that's also a boring life. Like, why would you ever want to live a life where you're like, I'm perfectly fine as I am, right? Whatever it is that you choose to define it at, education or art or family or relationships, right? You don't want to be, like, static. But then, and this is the thing I notice with a lot of Muslims, and I'm sure it's across the board in religious communities, is that people then create an external standard that they aspire to. If that standard is too close to where you are, it's not actually going to inspire you. But if it's too far away from you, it's going to crush you. Does that make sense? So, like, if religion is something that's important to you, the thing you aspire to should be enough that it forces you to become better, but not so much that it becomes impossible and becomes a burden on you. And that's for you to decide. And at a certain point, I think, for me, and this is just my own personal journey, right? Like, I realized that letting other people's definitions of how I should be were not actually making me a better person. Right? So if you have a spiritual practice, right, or religious practice, if that practice is someone else's practice and it's not organic to you, it's not actually going to make you a better person. Right? So if you just feel worse about yourself every day, you're not actually improving. Right? So that, I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. Also, buy my book. Because people randomly walk by, so I'll be like, buy my book. Yeah, it tastes like chocolate chip cookies.
On this subject, if I can just say something, if somebody is like judging you, coming to you with a judgment, maybe you can turn the question around. Well, you can say, well, I'm having difficulty with this aspect of it, and I'd be interested to know how you're dealing with it. Maybe he can help you. If he doesn't help you, well, then you're not doing much better. You can tell him that he's not doing so much.
Just make him buy the book. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Just make him buy the book. It's fine. Yeah. Whatever, shameless plugs. That's all we got. Capitalism won. No more questions? Awesome. I know what you're thinking. I don't work out.
I do have a question.
Sure.
So, back to your title, How to Be a Muslim. Can you talk a little bit about your own personal process in terms of self-identity and how you see yourself today?
So the title, I think, is more profound because of the political moment that we live in. My initial choice of the title was one tongue-in-cheek, right? Like how to be a Muslim, as if it's like a how-to manual. I thought that was kind of funny. And also because I failed at it mostly. right? That because, like the woman's question back here that you asked, that I had been given sort of a definition of religion that was like completely, like that just crushed me. It like over and over again I felt destroyed by it. And I was driving myself like insane because of it. In the present political moment, what I actually think is really interesting is that, every society has biases. So, on the far right, I hear a lot of people ask who is a Muslim because they want to know who to ban from the country, right? So, who is a Muslim is a question that's almost like a national security question. Like, who is a Muslim? Who should be let into the United States, or gently shown the door out of the United States? And the door is LaGuardia, which itself would make you want to leave the United States because it's like Port Authority with runways. So LaGuardia is so depressing, isn't it? It's like the end of empire. It's like the Donald Trump of airports. I didn't say that. And then on the left, and I see this a lot in New York or in liberal circles, is people ask why anyone would be religious in the first place. So like it's who is a Muslim versus why would you be a Muslim? And most people I know who are people of faith, their question is how to do that thing. And it's this constant struggle, and struggle is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, right? Like that volatility of, well, what does this mean to me? Why is this important to me? And I wanted to capture some of that. For me, I think, you can choose to have an identity that's very disjunctive, right? Like I am this or that. Or you can have something that's very conjunctive. And I kind of like, what was interesting to me about NYU is that I went to study philosophy because I wanted to make sense of like the world around me. And I know that's C-SPAN, hello. Can you just make sure that like nobody from NYU philosophy watches this? Thank you. I appreciate that. So, and look, I love my philosophy major, so I'm caveating this. Like there was none of the thinkers I studied, right, who were overwhelmingly men and white and Christian, right, could even make sense of my like high school classmates' religiosity. Right? Like there was this, like it was like we're going to define the entire planet, but we can't even make sense of like how most Americans live their lives. Right? Which is that kind of liberal bubble that produces the kind of condescension or just alienation from the rest of America. Right? And so there was a point to this. I completely lost the point. So to the point of conjunction, I mean, I still find Catholicism because of the people I grew up with to be really interesting and inspirational. And so I could choose to be like, I am this or that, or I could choose to be like, there are all these different elements to my personality or identity, and they may not always connect, but they do connect. And I think we live in an age where, there are a lot of people who want everyone to live in certain silos, right? So you're American or you're Muslim, you're American or you're brown, right? That kind of thing. And I reject that. I think it's stupid. So, what's up, C-SPAN? I just called like a whole political philosophy stupid. It's awesome. That's totally fine.
Some other people have joined us. I just want to make sure that we get everyone. Any other questions before we go back to Michael here? Okay.
Hello, Michael.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good, thank you. So the big question is religion versus technocratism. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with this?
That's an insane question. Why would you ask me that right now? Why would you do that?
It's not.
I mean, even the C-SPAN guy is like zooming in right now. Can you explain what you mean by technocratism?
So there are certain people that think that technology will solve all our problems, and they live as if all you have to do is just learn the latest technology and you're going to be fine because you're part of a part of the movement or whatever. And then there's opposing views that you have to take care of your spiritual self. I know that there is a common ground here somewhere, and it's hard to place.
Thank you. We work together. We're like the Avengers without powers. Thank you.
It seems to be hard to find the balance.
Yeah.
To maintain a spiritual outlook and still have an eye for technology. That's what I wanted to
yesterday, I went to see one of the great achievements of Western civilization, Wonder Woman. It was a great movie. It's such a good movie, by the way. Like, it was a really good movie. And there was like, that's why I love New York sometimes. There's like this couple behind us is just like, the guy's just running commentary the whole movie. Like, he's like, that's Greek mythology. Like, it's like, he sounds like he's reading Wikipedia entries out loud. And it actually made the movie more interesting because you were like, what is he going to say now? And then I look to my left, and there's a guy playing Candy Crush. Like, straight up has his phone out and he's playing Candy Crush. And I was like, you paid for this ticket, right? Like, where is this compelling need that you need to play Candy Crush, right? And it was like in this critical like fight scene, you know, it'd be like, Luke, I am your father, and he's like, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that I think that, you know, a lot of times technology has unique outcomes, but it also amplifies who we are inside. It doesn't necessarily bring about a new world. It just amplifies, you know, tensions that are already in a society. So I think that my sense is that religious leaders, especially in Muslim communities, have not completely, but generally failed to come to terms with questions raised by technology, like moral responses to technological dilemmas. Whether that's, you know, cloning or reproductive technologies or, you know, climate change or AI or any of these things. But I also think that a lot of technologists tend to have a very naive belief about the ability of human tools to change human beings. And so we saw in the election that Twitter basically won the election. It was amazing, right? Like, it was actually kind of interesting. Like, someone who just mastered Twitter completely crushed the political... Like, an entire political party was crushed by tweets. That was amazing. Fake news. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Because we didn't really think about how it could be used. So, I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. That's how I want to end on the election. Yeah. Everything goes back to the election. That's why the cover is orange. So, you know. Yeah. You have to buy the book. You do. It's a really good book. And like I said, it can change your experience and your life at the airport. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Haroon, would you like to read another small piece from the book?
Yeah, because I totally prepared a section to read. So I'm going to do right now. I dropped my phone. Okay. What is a good section? I know what a good section is. It's weird when you're like, oh my God, I wrote this book. What was I doing? How do I have a job? Okay. How long am I supposed to read for? I mean, I'm a brown man with a mic. I don't know if you know how this works. Yeah. I was at a wedding recently where an uncle is a term in South Asian culture for someone who's not related to you, and who is your elder, right? And he got up on the mic and he talked for 45 minutes, like start to finish 45 minutes. And someone went up to try to take the mic from him, and he started yelling at that person. And it was the greatest thing I've seen in my life, because he was just like, two people were screaming at each other at a wedding. Yes. Yeah. Years after my family had decamped from Somers, Connecticut, I had a chance to go back. My mother was buried in Enfield's Muslim cemetery, and after I'd finished reading YS is a chapter of the Quran, for her, the chapter she died to, I drove 15 minutes in the wrong direction to see what had become of the place where we'd lived together for so long. It had been nearly 4 years since she'd passed. Hafsa and I had just begun to hit turbulence, and I was rattled enough that I needed something from before her and before us to hold on to. In a gunmetal gray Camry, I drove down Turnpike Road, accelerated up Mountain Road, and then took the second left up the long hill, all the way to the end. I reached the cul-de-sac and crept my car up what was once our 1,300-foot driveway, well aware of the dire no trespassing signs I myself had nailed up so long before. warnings I'd never conceived could be used against me. The new occupants had painted our white windowsills black, though that left me more emulous than envious. My former home was darker and, as a surprising result, kinder. I got out of the car and walked a circle around the house, from the swimming pool to the outcropping of rock on the other end that I'd transformed, when I was much younger, into a fortress. I wanted more, though, to peer through the windows, to be in my room. I remember when I worked up the courage to ask Carla out, and thought thereafter life would only get better. A man is only not alone when he is with a woman. I'd look at all the rooms I imagined decorating or redesigning. Like when we live somewhere, we do so permanently. I hoped to walk in, light a fire in the chimneys we never tested, pass hot beverages to whoever happened to be home, and tell these replacements how much each oversized room meant to me. I'd do such a good job of describing what the place meant to me that the new homeowners would exclaim, "Why'd you leave?" I'd finally belonged somewhere, and then, right when it seemed like I had it all figured out, Carla closed the door in my face. I believe it was Nicholas Meyer of Star Trek fame who said that had high school lasted one more year, he would have ruled. Was he somehow me? I thought I'd made it at NYU, forgetting that it was just 4 years. I should have had plans for after. I got my dream job in Washington, D.C., but too bad when I was falling to bits. I made hijra to Dubai, where I could exhale years that had gone nowhere. I wondered if whatever great-great-grandfather left Mesopotamia for the Punjab felt the same way. But I had to leave Dubai before I was ready to, forced by circumstances made of finances. But that is not for them to decide, Gandalf said. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. There were many wonderful things about Dubai, but none of these fit my skill set or had room for me. Not even NYU Abu Dhabi. I guess it wasn't meant to be. There was nothing there for me, nothing I could do full-time that would permit me to build a life there, or as I preferred, a life rooted there but reaching everywhere. I grew extremely concerned by the fact of having to leave and desperately searched for other places to live besides America. I tried hard for Istanbul, for example. No such luck. I remember landing at JFK, standing outside Terminal 1, and being surprised that it felt familiar. But the greatest blows were yet to come. My career hadn't just been interrupted. Once back, I applied for countless academic positions, hoping I'd get something that'd allow me to finish my dissertation before the clock ran out. But I received almost no responses, never mind the courtesy of explicit rejections. From Mississippi to Oregon, zilch. So while I wanted to complete my project on Iqbal, the prospectus for which I'd already submitted and defended, I could not. There was no way I could dedicate the time and energy needed to write 5 full chapters, to complete the research necessary, to sit in the library for hours on end, when I had to cobble together enough freelance assignments, speaking gigs, and other projects, just to address my debt, never mind build a life anew. Maybe then Dubai had just delayed the inevitable, or made it worse. Maybe I'd be stuck in the same 10 jobs, none of them adding up to even one proper job. Maybe I would be back on another bridge in another few years, and this time, who would stop me? So when I received the invitation from the Muslim Public Affairs Council to speak at their Los Angeles conference, I told myself I wanted to go, and maybe I did. But more importantly, I had to. The hamster was back on his wheel. The last MPAC panel I'd spoken at had danced around almost the exact same topic, the Arab Spring. It was now 2013, however. The empire was striking back. The day I flew out, an historic snowstorm whitewashed the Middle East. Look, I tweeted, attaching a shot of the Dome of the Rock dressed up like a Christmas ornament, the Arab winter. Global warming, someone asked, or the end of days? Yes, I responded. If you're expecting an easy epiphany, you might want to stop reading. It took me almost 20 years for thesis to meet antithesis and begin a synthesis. I would not come from the clothes I put on, the women I was with, the drinks I drank. For a man who had to star in movies to get himself out the door, I can think of no better place to finish than Los Angeles. Thank you. I don't know what that means.
Thank you very much. And I do remember that snowstorm. It was quite a scene for those of you who were in the Middle East at that time. Thank you so much to Haroon Moghul. Thank you all for being here. I also want to wish Ramadan a good fast for those celebrating Ramadan this month. Thank you for joining us here at the NYU Bookstore. We will continue with a book signing. The books are on sale tonight, 20% off. So we're trying to encourage sales. And just keep in mind, we're closing at 8 p.m. tonight, and you're welcome to stay until then. Thanks so much, and have a good evening. Good night.
C-SPAN, where history unfolds daily. In 1979, C-SPAN was created as a public service by America's cable television companies and is brought to you today by your cable or satellite provider.
What I'm calling for, the title of my book, okay, which is Free Women, Free Men. I'm calling for an end to the sex war, okay, in feminism. Okay, women are well launched now. Okay, so this kind of this reflex, snide, put downs of men that are everywhere. This has got to stop. Right? Now I notice, wherever I go in the world, actually, that upper middle class career women are very unhappy. They're very unhappy, okay, even though they have achieved a certain status. What I'm saying is that feminists have to stop blaming men for their own unhappiness. The unhappiness is due, I believe, to huge systemic changes that women, for thousands of years, women had their own world. There was the world of women, and there was the world of men. And the sexes didn't have that much to do with each other, okay? This is a brand new experiment to have this new system where now women can be economically independent now. They're no longer dependent on a father or husband or brother, okay, for their sustenance, right? And they're working side by side with men in the workplace, right? This is an experiment. It's never happened before, right? I was saying in the book that we may have to accept a certain amount of tension between the sexes in the workplace. Right? That if the feminist idea that if we can just suppress men enough, women will be happy. I say no. Okay? I say, okay, it's on the basis of my own experience as a child in Italian-American immigrant community, okay, is that what women have lost is the old solidarity that they once had when they totally ruled the private sphere. The women's life all day long was with other women once, multi-generational, older women, okay, as well as the children, right? It was a huge tribal experience. And now what women are feeling is a sense of isolation and loneliness, disconnection, okay, from their old function. I'm not saying to go back. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying stop blaming men, all right? Like, for example, these marches that just happened, okay? The women were exhilarated. They were almost hysterical, okay? I don't think it had anything to do with feminism or anti-Trump or anything like that. I thought it was that women suddenly felt that surge of happiness again for being with other women, all right? You can actually see it in the Odyssey when Odysseus is washed up naked and alone. He's lost his ship, on the shores of Phaeacia, and he wakes to the sound of women's voices, laughing and singing and so on. It's the Princess Nausicaa going down to do the laundry on the shore. Okay? And actually, that is exactly what was going on up until fairly recently, where women were all together. They did all their chores together. They did the laundry. They did the cooking. I can remember this from my childhood in Endicott, New York, upstate New York. Among the immigrant Italian women. All four of my grandparents, plus my mother, were born in Italy. So